Yes.
Do they even accept the Gospel of James?
They don't know.
So then, can they not say we reject it?
We don't care what they accept because look, the thing is,
So how do you
it's a good
verify?
question. So look, the Christian believes in a certain amount of books in the New Testament because in the 4th century there's a guy called Athanasius who decided this is what's going to be in the book and this is what's not going to be in the book. This is what's going to be the New Testament and what's not going to be the New Testament. Now we would say, even from your perspective, oh Christian, how do you give this man such authority to include what's in the book and what's not? He can't turn around and say Athanasius, it was a council. Because if they say it's a council, like the Council of Nicaea or the Council of Constantinople, you can see it's somewhat plausible. Okay, the church has been given authority. This is a single individual. So my single question is, what gives Athanasius that power? So for me, as a non-Christian, I don't need to throw everything away from Christianity. Just like historians have been using texts of the Bible in a minimally and maximally way, I have the right as a historian to look at it and say, well, actually, I'm going to look as a historian, yes, at the sources which are closest to the geographic location which Jesus Christ is meant to be. I don't care about what Athanasius decided to be authoritative or not authoritative. I'm going to look at what's closest to Jesus. And when I do so, I find this actually, the descriptions of Jesus' birth is more in line with the Quran than your descriptions. He's going to say, no, but we don't accept it as Bible. I say, we don't care what you accept. We're talking, this is a historical discussion. It's not a religious one. We've already parked aside our religious biases. We're not talking from a confessionary perspective, faithful perspective, what Athanasius said, what Martin Luther said, what John Calvin said, what Augustine said. We don't care about these people. These are theologians. This is a historical exercise, not a theological one. That's what I would say to them. I say, when we look at the historical data here, if we are to believe that Jesus Christ actually existed, and we do believe that, then we have to look at what the evidences of his existence were, what kind of different narratives, and this is one of them.
So when was the Gospel of James? What date are we looking at?
2nd century.
I think so. Yes, I think we're talking
2nd century. What? After Christ?
Yeah, there's nothing before. There's nothing in the 1st century. So I don't think it's the 2nd century. I think it's in the 2nd century, but I don't know exactly the date. So we have to look at that. Yeah.
Can I just mention something? I was going to say, because as we know, we believe that Islam came from, Adam and Eve all the way till now. And I think when people say there's similarities between other religions and Islam, therefore Islam copied them, I think that actually plays in our favor because we've been there from day one. If there were no similarities, they would say, well, you say you were here from day one, but nothing you say can be found in other religions.
Sure. So it's a good point. What you're saying, you can look at it two ways: the borrowing narrative or the theological continuity narrative. What I'm saying is that when you look at it from our perspective, we're going to say, look, the similarity is because Allah says in the Quran that He has sent these books before. So of course we expect there to be similarities. No problem. But what I'm saying is that when you have information like what we've just presented, it adds a layer of argument to the case here. A layer of historical argument. Can you see what's going on? It's not just like my word versus yours and I'm faithful in one direction, you're faithful in another. I'm saying, look, you're saying, what's the sister of Aaron about? I'm saying there's now historical information about the sister of Aaron. You're saying, why is this in the Quran? I'm saying that's in other places where Jesus is meant to, close to where he's lived. Now we're having a historical discussion. It boggles the mind of Shoemaker.
There's also, I don't know if you've seen, there's also, the whole replacement theory about Isa alayhi salam being, there is some early Christians, I don't know if they're Unitarians. Have you looked into this, where they actually believe that this actually happened?
Yeah, of course. They're not Unitarians. I mean, like, a lot of it comes from the Gnostic Bible and stuff like that.
Yeah, so it's interesting, like, from these different Bibles, they're kind of proving, even though the Quran doesn't really say what happened, but one tafsir is that basically...
so exactly, so the substitution theory is there in the first century Christianity.
Yeah.
And I think we're talking here about, I cannot remember the name of the Gnostic writer. Obviously, they consider Gnostics to be heretics. So they'll say, we don't care. That's always the excuse with them. We say, we don't care what you consider to be orthodox and heterodox. Yeah. We are looking at things from a historical perspective. You're saying, okay, Jesus was crucified. We're saying, okay, let's take a look at it. Look at these different substitution theory here. What the Talmud said he was stoned. Why is there different results? Why is there different reports? Yes.
So just from a historical perspective, the reason why we're inclined to this as a historian is just because geographically speaking, it makes more sense. So we're looking at it from a geographical perspective.
Why not?
Okay.
Sure. Because the thing is, for us, the councils and stuff mean nothing. They mean nothing at all. Yani. So when we're looking at it, we're looking at we're historians here. We're not looking at theologians. The Christian's always going to retort in a theological manner. We're saying, look, we've already decided to park the theological bus in order to perform this exercise, and we're doing it. And what you're seeing repeatedly is that when the historical critical method is applied to Islam, it comes with favorable results. When it's applied to Christianity, it comes with unfavorable results. That's really what's going on here. So let's continue, because there's a few things I wanted to continue with you guys. So that's one thing. Okay, you can continue reading these in your own time. But I just want to say something quickly about Hadith, because it's very important that we talk about this, at least briefly. We spoke about the historical critical method, we spoke about the revision, and so on. But we have a method. Okay, we have a method. And the method it's in many ways very simple, but in very many other ways, very complex. And the method for Hadith to be sahih, yani for it to be authentic, then it has to fulfill 5 conditions. 3 of them are what we would call positive, and 2 of them we call negative. Like, so the hadith has to be muttasil sanad, for example, it has to be connected. So such a person saw such a person saw such a person, such a person heard from such a person, heard from such a person. The information. The people in that chain have to be adl. They have to have a good reputation, and that goes into a great detail we're not going to be able to cover today. And they also have to be dabt. They have to have dabt, or they have to have a precision or accuracy. Now that dabt is divided into 2. Either when they write, what they're writing is legible and understandable. Because at the time when they're writing stuff, you can't write something in an illegible manner, because then people would be like me. I'm very bad at writing. I would not qualify for someone, unfortunately. Or their memory has to be very good. So if they're known for bad memory, they would not be accepted in the hadith. So these are the things, 3 things, which are pretty easy to do. Like, sorry to say, a student of knowledge can probably do that. Find, okay, this guy, look at the biographies of men. Because how do you know? You know because these people's lives were effectively recorded in the early days of Islam, first 200 or 300 years. And we have books of recordings called Ilm al-Rijal, of biographies of these people. Okay, so that this person lived in this place, and this person lives in that place, and you'll find that there's embarrassing things that happen when people claim that hadith is narrated, and there's geographic inconsistency. Oh, I narrated the hadith from this person, but he lives in Syria and you live in Baghdad. How'd that happen? Did you ever go there? I never went there. So we don't accept hadith, for example. So there's that, but there's also 2 things, which is a shudud, so aberration, and that can be with the sanad. It cannot, and I'll explain what that is, or illa, which is a defect. Now the illa thing is the most difficult thing. So difficult. Because what is a defect how do you even classify what a defect of a hadith is? It can actually be a nassi defect. You can have a defect of the hadith in text. Yani the hadith can be sahih in terms of narration, but it goes against something established in the Quran, for example. I'll give you a famous example of this, Hadith al-Turab, which is mentioned in Sahih Muslim. And if you look at the hadith, it's narrated by Ka'b al-Ahbar. It says that, for example, Allah created such and such Adam from dust, and Adam was created on Friday. Yeah, it's a long hadith, and it says something like that. And there's also Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, that kind of thing. So even though this hadith is in Sahih Muslim, which is one of the most authoritative books of hadith, Al-Bukhari himself rejects it. Ad-Daraqutni, who's seen as one of the great scholars of ilal and stuff, he rejects the hadith. Why? He says it goes against the narrative in the Quran. And it sounds like Genesis. Now, he doesn't say this, but Ka'b al-Ahbar was a Jew before. So, okay, you got a guy here who's a Jew. He converted to Islam. He's narrating a hadith. It sounds like Genesis, even though it's not, the content is not the same. And it goes against the Quran. Al-Bukhari says, even though it's in Muslim, I mean, he doesn't say this, but he rejects the hadith itself. Daraqutni rejects the hadith itself. Why? Because it has a illah, it has a defect within it. So this example, this is a very difficult thing to do, because you can have a illah in the nas, you can have a illah in the content of the hadith, but you can also have a illah or a defect in the sanad. You can have something shadh in the nas and in the sanad. It's like you can have it in the chain of narration, and you can also have it in the actual content as well. Now this is the hardest thing to, because it's a falsification exercise. It goes negative, whereas to prove that the hadith is muttasil is easy. Okay, we look at the biographies, these guys are not liars, they're not whatever, they're not mubtada, whatever. And even the mubtada has some rulings attached to him, by the way. He can narrate a hadith so long as he's not calling to his bid'ah, and so mubtada is khawarij in Bukhari, for example. So it's an interesting situation there. But so there's very specific, logical, historical methods that are used here. Suffice it for me to say there's no equivalent in Christianity. You'll never find a single chain of narration that connects Jesus with anybody that's writing anything down. The religion of Christianity has not been preserved, therefore. And by the way, someone will say, well, that's not critical enough. If you imagine that Ahmad ibn Hanbal mentioned, for example, who died 241, he wrote, obviously, he compiled the Hadith, Musnad Ahmad and so on, that he memorized 1,000,000 Hadith. Now, what does it mean to memorize 1,000,000 Hadith? He didn't memorize 1,000,000 different wordings of the Prophet. He memorized, let's say, 10,000 Hadith with 100,000 sanads. So what he's really memorizing is the chains of narration. He's not memorizing 1,000,000. Do you get it? It's just memorizing names and orders. These guys had good memory. These guys, I mean, they had incredible, and it's not hard to believe. There's people that are doing that now. Stephen Shoemaker has a whole chapter trying to tell us how the Quran couldn't have been memorized. He said it's impossible for the whole Quran to be memorized, except in a literature, in a society where there's, and he tries to bring scientific proofs. I say, what are you talking about, akhi? And even I saw him in the interview, and the guy was saying, but you get some ceremonies of some young 9-year-old memorizing the whole Quran. Yeah. He said, yeah, but that's only because they read it from paper. So I'll say, okay, now I want to say, look, but I know some guys that taught me Quran, they were blind. They couldn't read it from paper, man. Wallahi, we had a sheikh, wallahi, he was blind sheikh in Finsbury Park Mosque. Everyone knows him. Yeah, and he recites Quran you know what I'm talking about?
Yes, I know.
You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, I know.
Akhi, bro, his memory is spot on, akhi. He doesn't make mistakes. Very rarely makes mistakes for Quran. And he's blind. You can't tell me this guy, he learned from paper. Anyway, so he's trying to say that they want to rubbish the idea of human memory. Because we live in an age of distraction. They think that people in the desert, they were as distracted as we were. They were looking at stars and memorizing poetry, that's all they had to do. Akhi. We're talking about comparing this and that. And even now you have people that are memorizing this stuff. So anyway, the point is this, is that the point I'm making is that they knew, but more hadiths are rejected than they are accepted. Imagine you got 1,000,000 hadith. How many sahih hadith do you reckon we have? And now we said about 10,000, by the way. Like most of the 95% of the hadith that are in the 6 books of hadith constitute what is authentic. What is authentic? So we've been so critical with the hadith that we've rejected 95% of them. We're the biggest hadith rejectors on the planet. We are, but we're not. We're throwing the baby with the bathwater. You know, there is some caution that we must exercise it. But we're saying that there's more rejection going on. That's how critical they say. This is illah, this is shadh, this is not corroborating. They're rejecting more than they're accepting. They're not happy to take, because it's true. The Orientalists will say that people have political ambitions. The Umayyads may have had political ambitions. The Abbasids may have had political ambitions. We accept. You're absolutely right. That's why we have a method, a criterion. Now compare this with the following, okay? The HCM method, now especially vis-a-vis the biblical discourse. I'm going to give you something that, according to Britannica, the historical criticism is the study of biblical literature method of criticism of the Hebrew Old Testament and the New Testament that emphasizes the interpretation of biblical documents in the light of contemporary environment. It draws upon not only exegesis and hermeneutics, but also the fields of history, archaeology, classical scholarship. So this is what we're doing here. Yeah, we're not just going for, I'm giving you a kind of a definition, right? Now look, they've got principles. And by the way, these principles were just developed recently, like maybe the last 100 years, 200 years, whatever. And by the way, it's so interesting that even according to those principles, Islam would be preserved. And I'll explain how. One of the principles is called the criterion of embarrassment. The criterion of embarrassment, for some reason, is a big thing they keep talking about. Is that if something is embarrassing to the person, it's less likely that they would record it about themselves. Now, let me give you an example. One of the things they mention is satanic verses. So if we were in the business of throwing away hadith, why do we have satanic verses? So they bring satanic verses attacking Islam. I say satanic verses is an evidence of preservation of Islam.